Welcome to another episode of Bitches Love Sports. I'm Bitch 2.
I'm Chwan.
And we are very excited about a special guest that we have coming on today.
Mm-hmm.
And as soon as they are in studio, I will introduce them. For right now, I plan to have a bunch of stats ready, but once again, I'm not even gonna lie to you. We've been busy. As a matter of fact, this might be the last full episode that we recorded for 3 weeks. Because next week on Monday, we have another event with Violet Crown Cinema. Mm-hmm. So we will be releasing the Q&A from that, where we'll talk to members of the Austin Outlaws women's football team.
So if you're in town, come watch it. It's going to be really good.
Yep. And then after that is a holiday. And so we might do something.
I'm never on this country, okay? So.
How long are you going to say that?
We don't have an Independence Day.
Has Spain ever not been independent?
Always. That's why we don't have an Independence Day.
So the week after that, we might do something. I don't know. We'll figure it out. But anyway, today, just know that, yes, I'm ready to accept that some of my NBA bays are soft. Just sometimes you have to be honest about these things, okay? Mm-hmm. Jason Tatum is considered a leader of his team, and he did not show up. Okay? I'm not going to run from it. I'm not going to hide from it. It's just the facts. He literally had in the game that they needed to win in order to keep the series going, he had the worst field goal percentage that he's had all season. I said that the team needed two Batmans, and he wasn't even Superman. He showed up like Clark Kent.
He didn't even suit up. We still love you though.
And there's a lot of reasons that could be the case. I'm not going to pretend like I know him personally. I can be like, look, this is what happened. There are a lot of reasons that could be the case. And to me, that's the most interesting component of the story is listening to people talk about the NBA Finals. You didn't hear anybody say oh, Jason Tatum isn't talented or Jason Tatum sucks.
That would be a lie.
Right. And that's the most interesting thing to me is that he has the talent, but something else stopped him from showing up, and so it brings up the question again of mindset, of attitude, of how you approach the sport as a competitor, Have
you watched Hustle yet?
No, I haven't.
Oh, it's really good. You should watch it. I'm not going to spoil it, but anyways, when you watch it, we'll talk about it. But it fits a lot with the mentality of a basketball player. So,
were you gonna?
Well, I was gonna say, but I don't want to spoil because it's a really good movie. So okay. I don't want to. And the main character is Spaniard.
Well, I'm gonna say this because, what people were saying was that Jason Tatum spent too much time worrying about the officiating, worrying about the calls that were being made. That it seemed like the game was moving too fast for him. That it seemed like the way the Warriors were playing kind of had him flustered, and all those things are possible. And it's if you look at Steph Curry on the flip side, he is also talented, right? But if you listen to his interviews and you think about the mindset that he was bringing to this series, it just kind of demonstrates how important that mindset as a competitor is. Because even before they won that last game, Steph Curry was already calling himself the petty king, right? And some people have a problem with that because they're you shouldn't hold on to what other people are saying about you, yada, yada, yada. But in my opinion, I think it all depends on how you respond to what people are saying about you. If it drives you to perform and show up when your team needs you, by all means do that. For some people, it ends up being a distraction, right? One of the things that I talk to my athletes about a lot is ego lifting and ego practicing. And that is when you are practicing or working out in a way that just makes you feel better and you're not actually working on your strengths, right? So it's kind of like people who they'll skate 9 miles at the Veloway, but the problem with their skating is actually that they don't get low or they have agility issues or something like that. But instead of them getting on the track and actually practicing doing stops in each direction and doing the stuff that's difficult for them, they'll be oh, well, I did 9 miles at the Veloway. I feel good. That's ego practicing. You don't need to work on distance or that kind of endurance. You need to work on muscular conditioning. You need to work on staying low. You need to work on your agility. You need to work on your stops. And none of those things are you doing when you're skating 9 miles at the veloway, right?
That's a fact.
As ego-driven, right? But if you are able to take the shit people are talking about you and be like, you know what? I'm going to become one of the best shooters in the NBA. You know, I'm going to make myself hard to defend. Oh, everybody thinks that I won't make it in this league because, you know, I'm skinny, I'm small, XYZ. Like, okay, I'm going to show them what this skinny dude can do, right? Yeah. When you do it that way, then by all means, be the petty king. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so I think as athletes, sometimes we have to ask ourselves, like, who are the leaders on our team and why are they the leaders? Are they actually setting the right example for the team? Or are we just saying this person is talented and so we're going to look at them as a leader? Because now we've seen this happen with Kevin Durant, where he was upheld as a leader in a lot of situations. And he is by all means one of the most talented people in the world. But is he a great leader? Like, he's not proven himself to be a good leader, you know? And in the case of the Celtics, Jason Tatum, very talented. But did he have what it takes in order to instill the right mindset among his teammates? And it seems like maybe not, you know?
I don't know. I feel like, and this is just me personally, when the game starts getting to you in any kind of way, because of the way that it's being called, because how you feel about your own performance, how you feel about the team's performance, how you, like, people are talking shit to you from the other team, X, Y, Z, whatever the situation may be. I know that that affects me personally, and I don't, for the most part, use that as to drive me to do better. Like, I get into my head very easy. And I do feel like that's kind of what happened to him too. Like,
oh, absolutely.
Like, he just let them win in a way. And it sucks. And it's a fucking horrible feeling. Trust me. Like, you're not having fun anymore. You don't have faith in yourself anymore, in your team, and like anything. Like, everything is just frustrating and everything sucks. And you already know you're gonna lose. And you might not even be losing anyways, but you're already, like, it's anyways, mine is fucked up thing.
My mindset coach used to always say, beliefs lead to your emotions lead to your actions, and your actions lead to your results. And so once you get to the point where you no longer believe you can win, or you no longer believe that you deserve to win,
it's over.
It's game over. Mm-hmm. And that's one thing the Warriors never lost. Like, all of their star players are petty as fuck. If you listen to their interviews, just the number of times that they brought up shit people were saying back in January, when people were even questioning would they have a record to even make the playoffs. And they're like, oh, so-and-so said such and such about us. It's like, well, y'all were losing. But they still were like, in their minds, they still deserve to be champions. So it's like, they were like, we don't care what our record is. How dare you say XYZ about us? Mm-hmm. You know, and if you listen to the interviews of Steph Curry, of Draymond Green, of Klay Thompson, and listen to how they talk about and feel about all the shit that was talked about them, you can tell that, yeah, there was a big part of them that was just like, oh, you think XYZ? Oh, just wait. I got you.
And I wish 100% that I was like that. I really do.
It's hard. It's hard. As someone who's tried to do it a couple of times, it's not easy, because especially when somebody says something that makes us feel away, our first instinct is to try to feel better, right? And so that's why we get into those habits of like ego lifting and ego practicing. And it's because we want to make ourselves feel better. But it's like, you got to think long-term about those situations. So it's like, do you want to feel better in the moment? Or do you want to do something that's going to make you feel better over time? You know, so that first time that you're like, you know what? You know, so-and-so is right. You know, my stops are trash. I'm not a great blocker. It's not going to feel good to admit that, but once you actually get on the track and start working on your skills and you start to become better, it'll feel good then. And once you're able to perform, it's going to feel better then. But if all you're doing is like short-term shit, like, oh, you know what? So-and-so said XYZ about me. I'm going to do something that I'm good at to make myself feel better. But then you go back on the track and you're still blocking like trash. Like, it's very short-term gratification. Yeah. As a matter of fact, I think I was reading a book It might have been The Art of Impossible, where they were talking about how your ultimate success is correlated with your ability to delay gratification. And that's why, because sometimes the things that you need to work on in the beginning are not going to feel good at all, but it's very necessary in order to make progress.
Oh yeah, you need to fail in order to success. There's no way. I mean, I don't know anybody that has just like, unless you're born into it. But you know, that's a different story. There's like a very small percentage in this world that's happened. But you need to fail in order to success.
Yeah, and I'm gonna put that another way, because a lot of people are like, you need to fail fast. I'm gonna say it this way: you actually need to be willing to learn quickly. In order to learn quickly, you have to put yourself in a lot of situations that where maybe there are things that you don't know. So you have to be willing to put up with failure in order to learn. Like, you can't be afraid of failure and still learn and still achieve success. Like, you have to at some point decide that, like, I'm going to put myself in these situations in order to get better. And if that means failure, like, okay, this is the threshold of failure that I'm going to be willing to deal with in order to get the resources I need, in order to learn what I need to learn, etc. But if you're afraid of failure, if you are afraid of working on the things that you suck at because you don't want to admit that you suck, then you're not gonna get better.
It's over. It's game over. It's game over for you, dog. Sorry.
Alrighty. So our special guest has entered the studio. Yay! So the special guest that we have today is Kim Stegeman, aka Rocket Mean. A lot of our listeners know this name. She is the executive director and founder of Portland, Oregon's Rose City Rollers since 2004. Derby has been Mean's full-time job since 2006, making her the longest living employee of modern Derby, which is amazing. Yeah. She has degrees in advertising and marketing from Portland State University and worked at Davis Ellen Advertising prior to running Rose City Rollers. She skated from 2004 to 2009 on Guns N' Rollers and our all-star team, the Wheels of Justice. I don't think I knew that. She volunteers to do strategic planning and business coaching because she loves it and she's great at it. And she's also an animal harasser. And by that, she means if there's a fuzzy animal, she's going to pick it up. All right, so everybody, welcome to the broadcast, Rocket Mean. How are you doing today?
It's hot. And it has. I'm in Portland, Oregon, and it hasn't been hot for a long time, so it's a little shocking.
Yeah, no. It's
how
really
hot is it there?
I don't know. It's probably like 80. It just feels really hot.
We're like 105 here. Like, yeah, it's hot.
Yeah, it is really hot here, and we're not even done yet.
Yeah. Well, it's just been like it's been raining since like October, so this is a change.
Yeah. We could use some of that. So thanks for coming on the show. So with a lot of the people who have been around Derby for a long time, one of the first things that we like to talk about is just how you got into Derby and how you went from being introduced to the sport of roller derby to, in your case, becoming one of the founders of Rose City Rollers.
Sure. So I think the thing that always strikes me is how weird 2004 was, because while there was Texas and Arizona had started playing, there wasn't like a lot of things around like that we heard about it. I was literally at a punk show and my friend Jeffrey Wonderful was like, I want to start a derby team. But Jeffrey was like super theatrical. He put on like rock operas and all this crazy shit. And so he wanted to do it for like, he wanted the 70s like theatrics, right? I grew up working at a roller rink. And I was like, okay, so I'm really good at roller skating. And this seems like a thing that we could do while we drink. And I could hang out with my friends. And so like for me, it was about kind of community and doing something super fun. And then my roommate Yvette, or my former roommate Yvette, she was a drummer in a bunch of bands. And so she was really into kind of the theatrics. And so we kind of came together and like did it. But we hadn't heard of Derby around. So it was very strange. And then in 2004, like 2016 popped up around the US kind of simultaneously. And so it's a weird thing, you know, if somebody tells you like that there's like a little sprite that like pops like inspiration into people's head, like I would totally believe it because that's what it, you know, seems like for Derby. Right? So And then we started like trying to figure out how to play the game. And holy, what was that? My computer just paused out. Sorry. That was very strange. So yeah, it was kind of this weird thing where it just kind of spontaneously happened. And then we said, oh, is there anybody doing this? And we found that Texas was playing, and we got a video from them that literally explained nothing about how to play the game. It was just a hilarious roller derby. And then, but then from there it started growing, and we formed the UFC, which was basically a forum for communicating about like, what are we all doing and how do we do this? And Hydra, who was a scientist, she helped moderate the forum. And then in 2005, we met in a nasty hotel room in Chicago and formed the Women's Flat Track Derby Association. And that was really kind of like, okay, well, let's start standardizing some stuff, because if I remember correctly, like Texas and Arizona had like house rules. And that was kind of standard, like for the course in the beginning of Derby. And so like, we were like, if we're gonna have a sport, I know one thing about sports is like, you should have a common set of rules. And so that was something we started working on, and like officiating, and like, how do you do games, sharing best practices, and then setting up like rankings and things like that. So we could talk about how do we have gameplay. And then, so there's a lot of that in the beginning of it. And then while we're doing this on a kind of, at the time, a national level, at home, we were all also building our own businesses, right? Some of us treated them like businesses more than other people. But we were all building our leagues. And so you had this really strange dynamic of all of us simultaneously building derby leagues that looked however we wanted them to look based on like who we were. And we functioned like, whatever worked best for us. I mean, so I became a nonprofit right away. I'm in Portland, Oregon. And so we have a ton of resources for nonprofits. So it was probably like really natural for me to do that. And so we started kind of building from there. But I think very early on, I was like, Portland in the early 2000s was like a mecca of like people in their 20s and 30s who wanted to do wacky, hilarious things. Like we were known for it. And so I think our first meeting, we had like 80 people at it.
Wow.
We had my phone number published on the back of a local paper for like months. And so like, and that's how we started kind of building people. And like, so, I mean, we hit like 200 members real quick. And so, I think probably our experience was different because a lot of leagues will have like, say they're right around 30 to 40 people in general. Maybe they bump up at times like 60 people, but their leagues are about that size, right? We flew past those kind of numbers really quickly. So it felt like we had to put infrastructure in place, right? So I think that was the place where I think the day that I became the executive director was the day that I was like, okay, this really matters to people. Like, this is the thing. This is their pony. You know what I mean? And I was like, if I don't organize this, if I don't make sure that practice happens, or that we have this space reserved, or that we start kind of putting some things together to be able to act like a business and start gathering resources, like that there's going to be a whole lot of people that are disappointed. And so maybe it was like some straight up guilt of like, I want to make sure everybody has a good time. But like, I really kind of dove into like running things. And, like most people who run roller derby leagues in the early days, like I worked a full-time job, and then I got off my full-time job and I worked another full-time job at roller derby. And I had a very nice boss who was very understanding of the fact that he knew I was doing derby stuff at work. But yeah, it was, those early days were wild. I think the biggest thing for me was, really being cool with the fact that I didn't know everything I needed to know. And I'm one for constant learning. Like that is my jam. Like if I don't know something, I'm going to learn about it. And B, asking people around me for help and being like, does anybody know somebody who does X, Y, or Z? And just like asking for like informational meetings with people to ask their opinions about things, even if it's like some of the like most kind of beneficial meetings that I had with people when we had conversations about, I would talk to somebody who I'm like, this seems really unrelated to what I'm doing with derby, but there could be something there. and being open to those kind of things. So yeah, that was a lot of the early days and learning how to kind of act a bit more like a professional. Like, I think that my wild days were pre-derby. Like, anybody that knows me is like, oh, she's serious about that. Because like, derby was kind of like calming down because I immediately stepped into the role of leader. You know, in those early days, being a leader in roller derby, you could be a little bit rougher around the edges. You know, I didn't have kids in our organization in the beginning. You know, now I've got 200 youth athletes, and so I have to, you know, have to deal with youth parents. It's always hilarious. But like, you know, in the early days, it was much more par for the course. Like, I could be that person that, you know, I shouldn't even say the things out loud from the early days. But some of the antics of the early days, just like, you know, it would make us look bad in the community nowadays. Yeah. You know, and I have to think about that. And especially like the more and more we start behaving like a traditional nonprofit, and we have funders who are helping, you know, fund our scholarships and our rent and roll, our roller derby lending library, and our skate mobile, which takes skates and pads and everything out to community events and to schools and things like that. The more those things are happening, the more beholden I am to how we are received by the community. And so it's like, you know, as our business matured, we also kind of matured the way we wanted to be received by our community. So it's been, you know, a long and windy road, as they say.
I can relate to a lot of what you're saying, especially when it comes to being comfortable with the fact that I don't know everything. And I will say for me, that's tough. And I'm sure S. Payne can relate to this too, because we're both running Violet Crown. And I think the interesting thing for us is that it's like we don't know everything as far as what to do to make a derby league successful in the way that we define success. Like, we've both been members of other leagues that have been able to operate and run. So we kind of know, like, okay, this is what a league needs to do. But as far as like taking those next steps, we're kind of like, okay, so how do we go from being like the typical derby league to actually being able to compete with some of these other sports organizations in Texas? And then trying to balance that with the fact that most of our members have been with other leagues and they expect certain things. And we're like, well, we're trying to figure out how to do it in this way. That can be tricky. But learning from every single resource that we can find, including you, has been like so instrumental in us being able to just like do anything. Like, I took a course on global sports management. I'm constantly reading books on just like how the NBA was founded and started making money, or like how the Cowboys got to where they are. The story of Jerry Jones, the story of people like
she calls herself the Jerry Jones of roller derby.
I called myself that one time as a joke, and now it won't die.
It's followed me forever because it's just like the best. Like, this is the best.
I mean, I would probably say that you're closer to being the Jerry Jones of roller derby than I am. But I want to go back to what you were saying about like the very beginning stages, because it sounds like you had the idea of starting a league before you really knew a lot about what was going on with Texas and Arizona.
Yeah. We were. Yeah, I mean, Jeffrey came up to me and said it, and I know he hadn't heard anything about it. And so it was really interesting. The inspiration was more about him and like Jeffrey Wonderful's love of 70s theatrics. I mean, like, he wanted it to be more of an act than a sport. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of us struggled with that in the early years of, okay, do we do the fake fighting? Do we do the penalty box, like wheel, any of that kind of crazy stuff? And we did a little bit of that in the very beginning. It was super funny. Like, there was like a fake fight, which people were kind of expecting. And like, so we had like a fake fight in like one of our first games, and it ended up being a dog pile of like 30 people in a pile with skates on them. Like, and somebody came out and was like, I'm going to file a complaint against this person in the league. They kicked me. I'm like, dude, you don't want to a fucking pile of people.
It's a pile of people. I'm sure you got kicked.
You know what I didn't do? Dive into that pile of people. And it was like, yeah, so we had a bunch of that kind of stuff in the beginning of like, what is your identity? And I think that is one of the things that I would say is like, look at why you're there, right? So for you, if you're trying to exist in a place where you have derby leagues, right? And so if you're creating a league, a community, or a group of leagues or whatever it is, you need to be looking at what is your goal, what is your intention, and have a mission statement. And that should be a differentiating factor from the other leagues around you. Otherwise, you're just another person creating a league because you couldn't get along with somebody in a league, which is like which is a lot of splits in a lot of cities. Is basically it's a couple people couldn't get along. I think the thing is you have to have it stated, like, what is your mission? Why are you here? What are you trying to achieve? Because then that gives you a place to go back to and go, okay, well, here's the reason we do this. And then you dive into the how. And then here's why we're doing this other thing. And then you dive into the how. So it really is a matter of like really, really fine-tuning your existence from the very beginning. Because then that says, okay, well, if our goal is to be this thing that we say, then you go, okay, well, what are 3 big steps? What are 3 big lofty goals that will get us there in the next few years? And I remember years ago we had a meeting, and it was my board and I were doing strategic planning, which we've been doing like for many, many years. And we were working on like mission, vision, values, and things like that, which is a very important step. And again, you go around, you find somebody, you ask somebody to help facilitate who has experience doing it, because you should not be facilitating those things in your early time of having a league. So you're working on mission, vision, values. And I remember at one point we were making this vision, and it was to win. It was to have a world champion team and have there be headlines in our local papers that said that and stuff like that. And it was super funny because I remember the time being like, oh my God, we'll never get there. Because it was like, at the time we made that goal, we consistently lost like every all-star game that we played. And I think it wasn't until we finally beat, I think the Neanderthals might have been the first game we finally won. Yeah. But it was like we were still in that mode where every time our all-star team played somebody, we lost the games. So to me, like having that vision was so lofty, right? But it also was the thing that was like, okay, if that's where we want to go, how do we get there? And then we looked at, and you have to go back and look at those things over and over again and go, okay, well, we said our mission is to do X, Y, and Z, right? We said our vision is to do this thing. We said these are the core values that we live by. And then you keep going back to those and going, okay, now how do we make 3 goals for the next 12 months that are going to further this along? And I think part of it is like people get really, really overwhelmed with running a league and going, oh my God, I could do 1 million things. You could do 1 million things, but you know what you should do is you should do 3 things that are going to have really impact. And you shouldn't fuck around. You need to have a budget, and it needs to be a good, clean budget that is, be conservative, like on your budget, but make sure that you're like paying for the things that are going to make your volunteers want to come back, that you're, you have enough money in the budget to put on good events, that you have that money for advertising, and that you're being really transparent. Like if you're running a derby league, make your numbers like public to people, like post. If you're a nonprofit, they're public to people in general, but share them with your membership, because I think the biggest thing about running a derby league is when people don't have access to information is when they get like really like, you're keeping some shit from me, you're super shady. And it's like, no, SharePoint is just a pain in the ass and you just can't get to the document. We have access issues and we need to fix our IT system. It's not that we're keeping information from you. But I think that that's like one of the things with derby is people are like, it means so much, and you have people coming from all different like socioeconomic walks of life that if they're paying, like my members pay $55 a month in dues, and to some people that's not substantial. To other people, it's a lot of money. We also have scholarships to cover anybody who qualifies for a Roost lunch or SNAP or any of that kind of stuff. But for the average person, it's still enough that they're like, well, and in derby, I think people just inherently have a much stronger sense of ownership in what's going on because of the fact that they're paying to play, right? And they're paying, in most places, they're paying to travel and things like that. And so I think that people inherently have more ownership. And so as a leader of an organization, you have a greater responsibility to be as transparent as possible, and be accessible to your members and have, it's a lot.
We realize that now.
So were y'all always flat track, or was there a time when y'all thought about doing bank track, or were doing bank track in the beginning, considering the 70s inspiration in the beginning?
Yeah, we talked about it, but I think one of the things that we always liked was the accessibility of flat track. Yes. And so when we started talking about, well, I was like, first off, it's enough of a pain in the ass to find a flat surface to skate on, let alone a place to put a bank track. And so I was like, just inherently the nature of looking at what kind of space you need, you know. And in the early days, first we were in a tiny community center for like just a few times, and then we rented out a basement of a bowling alley, and it was like nasty and greasy, so we skated there, right? And then we went and we were playing in 3 different places per week. We were at Gresham Skate World, so we had one night there. We were at the Armory, which is like a place where actual like military folks do like drills and stuff. So we'd like skate on this big room that had like oil slicks occasionally. And then we skated one night a week in Durance at the Oaks Park skating rink, which was a beautiful wood floor. But it was like, the fact that it was so difficult just to find places to skate didn't make me go, let's try to find some place to put a bank track, because like, that's the thing. When you're starting a derby league, you got to choose the path of least resistance. So like when people were like, let's do this, I'm like, how about fuck off now? Because you're trying to add, and there wasn't enough competition to even make it like make any sense. You know, like if everybody around us is playing flat track, and flat track is accessible because of the fact that people can do it anywhere,
right?
Then let's just roll with that, and let's not overcomplicate our lives. You know.
So talk about your experience of like being part of the United Leagues Coalition, and then you all forming the Women's Flat Track Derby Association. Because like this is honestly my first time hearing this story from the perspective of somebody who was not a member of Texas Roller Girls.
Yes. Yes.
Yes. Yes. So when you in joining the United Leagues Coalition, I guess I'm curious, like, what was your impression of it? What did you expect it to turn into? And what was it about this organization that made you decide, like, yes, I'm willing to invest the time and money into traveling to Chicago to meet with these people and see where we can go?
So I think in the beginning it was like, we were all just kind of looking for resources, and for a lot of it was like, oh God, are the rules published somewhere? Like, I mean, it was that basic, and like, oh, what are other leagues doing? And I think that when we realized there was like, when the momentum started growing, I mean, it literally feels like a lifetime ago. Like even like, I mean, I was 20 something, 28, I think. And like, so it totally feels like a lifetime ago. It's almost 20 years now. And I think it was really about, okay, what are the best bets? What are other people doing? Are people charging dues? You know, how are people arranging things? Is there a particular size room that we should be doing this in? Like all these different kinds of things. It was really about how far along are other people, and can we share resources so we're not all reinventing the wheel? And then it was like, and then it was, but by the time that we got there, I think that we were solidly in spring of 2005. We had been around for over a year, or just about a year. I think we started in June of 2004. And so at that point, I've got like 200 skaters. So it wasn't a matter of like, should I go? It was like, oh fuck yeah, I'm gonna go. Like, it was like, we're excited to be a part of it. And you know, it was kind of funny. I mean, we got there, and like, we're, you know, the only league in Oregon, right? And then each state basically had a league. And we get there, and we were just happily like building our league and doing our thing and learning how to, you know, dealing with, you know, like, so we all had just our own internal, like, building an organization and the drama that comes along with putting a, you know, a whole bunch of like kind of egomaniac chicks in a room and letting them like cause their own drama. And then we get there, and then we laugh because we're like, oh wow, there's some beefs in this room. It was like Texas and Arizona, like, you know, they were like nemesisters. And you know, like arguing about like who's like, you know, the house rules thing and like trying to talk about which one we're going to do. And, you know, Texas didn't want bank track in the room because they wanted to be flat track, and they really made it so that ended up in the title. But at the same
hold on.
Women's Flat Track Association.
That's why.
Yeah.
Wow.
Wait, so were there bank track leagues who wanted to be a part of this larger organization?
I don't think that there was a bank track team in the room. I'm pretty 1,000% sure on that.
But like before that, were there bank track teams who were like, well, we want to be part of this organization with these other derby leagues? Like let's all work together.
I don't think they wanted to be there.
But they had to make sure that it was flat, right? Like it was not baked.
Yeah, it was flat. It was, yeah, I got into it. I think it was funny. Like, I don't remember if it was that meeting or another meeting, but I remember there was a league that was from the Bible Belt, and they were like, y'all, we can't do the things that you guys are doing. But like, this would not be accepted in our area. Like, when we were talking about, like, because there was something about, I don't know, there was some opportunity that was being discussed there about, I don't know if it was like Playboy or something, but there was something risque that we were talking about, and they were like, oh, this will not fly in the Bible Belt if they caught wind that we were part of an organization that supported X, Y, or Z. And we were like, okay. But like, I mean, for me, it was hard to relate. Like, I'm from Portland. Like, it was like, you know, we were in the heyday of doing all kinds of wacky, ridiculous, fun things. So, but it was interesting to get there and be like, I'm just trying to kind of cobble this shit together at home, and didn't realize, because people had already been playing each other, like largely like, you know, like the Texas and Arizona stuff, they've been playing each other, and like, so there was already like people that knew each other and like, you know, had feelings about like how things go. And so it was funny, you know, lots of talk about like, in those early years about like officials being a part or adjacent to us. And I mean, and I think that there's a lot of things that I wish we would have kind of like pushed harder, like just some of those early conversations. I think about how they impacted different leagues, and how like a lot of leagues that I've known and worked with really keep volunteers and officials at bay and don't let them call themselves a part of their league. I'm like, I don't give a shit. Call yourself a Rose City Roller. Like, if that makes you happy and you're doing, you know, stuff with us, like, you're a Rose City Roller. Yeah. Like, because I think that Derby is largely about building community. And so, you know, you want your community, like, you can have like different parts of it. Like, here's your skaters, and here's your volunteers, and here's your juniors, and like all these things, right? Here's your recreational program. You can have all these different programs, but like, I mean, just, I'm all about a more inclusive community as opposed to like keeping people outside of it. Just, I've never seen the benefit in that.
That makes sense.
This is so interesting. This is so. I love this
conversation. Somebody's gonna watch this and be like, "Oh, you remember it totally wrong, mean." And I'm like, "Oh, you're probably right. I've done a lot of drugs and drank for a long time, so I could remember things wrong." And anybody that knows, huh?
Wouldn't all y'all be?
Everybody was on drugs, right?
I don't know if everybody was. Probably not those from the Bible Belt, like.
Well, that's a different. Let's just put it like that.
I mean, we also had all the stuff with like in those early days of like USARS. Oh my God, USARS was like such a pain in the ass. Like they were they made you pay like for insurance per bout, and so if you had like, so you had to like cut a check and fill out an application for every single bout, and I was like, why are you making us jump through hoops like this? It was crazy. Like everybody had to have insurance. Every skater had to have insurance. And then for every bout, you had to buy insurance and fill out an application. And it was like, you're just making doing this real tedious. Like we have a million other things. And that to me, I think was the kind of one of the most annoying things. It was like all those little tedious things where it's like, as much as you can remove those kind of like, I think about those barriers, like all that gatekeeping that we had in the early days of Derby that came externally. Like, I think we all need to look at that internally too and go, hey, where have we created unnecessary gatekeeping within our organization? And we're looking at that right now within our org. Like, how do we break that kind of thing down? Like in skating, like if people just want to play some damn Derby, like let's make it accessible so they can just play some damn derby. And yeah, I think that, but the early years, they were also super fun, but it was kind of hilarious because we were all running around trying to like figure out how to do the thing. And I wish the WFTDA would have put more emphasis on bringing leagues together and helping us all build strong businesses. It had so much to do with the ethos of like individuality, not only as skaters, for the skater, by the skater, but also like for leagues. But I think it did a disservice because we didn't say, hey, let's have a whole series on how to teach leagues how to run a business successfully.
Right.
Why don't we get it to the point where almost every league has a paid staff within the first couple of years they're operating, so that there's some stability built into their business structures. And there was just, I think we could have done more information sharing and training along those lines. I think WFTDA could be more, stable right now themselves had they really put invested in like building out amazing coach training programs and building out business training programs. I would send coaches through a training program, and drop, a couple $100 on it. No problem. Over and over again. That could have been their model. But it's just like, again, it's like the same way. You guys are talking about we have this league and we could do 1 million things. But yeah, you have to take it back to simplifying. What are the core things that you need to do for stability and for long-term success? Because there's a whole shitload of shiny objects all around you. You know what I mean? But like you have to look at those shiny objects in the early days and go, okay, well, is it worth my time? If my time is finite and I'm going to give a little chunk of it to this, partnership with this tiny business over here that really is not going to help progress your stuff? Or should you be spending that time working on building out, goals for the next 2 years? Or is your time better spent finding a volunteer bookkeeper or doing some of that, like creating a video about all the different kind of resources you need and asking people if they want to come support you and how to get involved? Because some of those shiny objects, if you're like, oh, we can go and put on skates and go be in a parade, I'm like, how long is it going to take to plan that? And are there other things that I should be doing right now instead? And what can I delegate?
Mm-hmm. Big facts. I'm nodding my head so much because, I agree with a lot of what you're saying. Like, even with us being new, right now it's Pride Month and there's so many Pride events and parades. And I'm like, man, our league is a baby league. We just don't have the resources to invest in something that sounds as simple as sending people to a parade. But it's just like, in order to coordinate that takes, time and resources that unfortunately are very limited for us and that we need to put towards things like
to do it.
Yeah, like getting ready for our first bout. And I was also nodding my head as you were talking about, the business aspect of different leagues, because I had several conversations with higher ups in the WFTDA whom shall remain unnamed for the time being. But, it was basically about the fact that during the pandemic, there were a lot of resources being sent out about things dealing with tolerance and inclusivity and things of that nature. And I was just kind of like, yo, there are leagues right now who aren't being allowed to operate. And they are trying to figure out how they're even going to be able to keep their space and maintain connections with partners with which they've been doing business and even keep their members engaged. Like, they can't worry about inclusivity among their membership when there's no damn members. So how about some resources about how to bounce back from this long ass hiatus and what you need to have in place in order to be successful coming back and moving forward, because that's a lot of the feedback that I was getting from people. And around here, it even got to the point where it's like, people would start saying yo, if you start talking to Lethal about Derby, she's going to start talking about revenue. So unless you're prepared to
the money, the M word,
it's unless you're prepared to have a whole conversation about the history of sports in America and how they started making money, don't even go there.
Don't even ask her. She's going to drop all the facts, all the historical shit, everything.
Let me tell you about broadcast rights in the 60s.
Yeah. I mean, I will tell you, like, historically, money has been one of those things that it is a polarizing thing within Derby. I mean, I've always had it, but
that's the problem.
Here's the thing. We started working on that, but it is something that like membership doesn't love like hearing about. Like, I don't know why. It is a strange phenomenon in Derby. But it's like, okay, well, we need to generate money and we need to have a budget so we know what we're spending money on. And I couldn't believe it. Oh my God, a couple years ago, I was talking with a league that had been around for a long time. And it's like, oh yeah, we don't really have a budget. I'm like, what the fuck? How do you make decisions? Like, if you don't have a budget? I'm sorry, am I not supposed to cuss? Like, it's
no.
That's all you want. We do it all the time.
Bitches love sports, so don't worry.
Oh yeah. But it's one of those kind of things where I've never understood an aversion to having well articulated financial plans. And I mean, it kind of, you have to have that trade-off. Like, is this endeavor that we're going to do worth the time? Like, is it going to have a proper return? I mean, for me, like, I have my event manager going with me to RollerCon, and we're going to talk about like venues and how do you maximize the dollar per square foot in your venue? Like, where do you bring in money? How do you have your setup help with like the flow of an event? Make money for you. How do you look at the difference between things like, all right, well, let's drop the ticket prices if we're having a hard time selling at a certain price point, so we can double the number of people in the room, because then those people can spend money on $9 cocktails and shirts. Right. And the next thing you know, you balance out that income. But it's like, you have to talk about revenue streams. You have to talk about where to invest money. Like, so for example, in the early days, when I was first hired by Rose City Rollers, I made $30,000 a year that year. And I had taken a $20,000 pay cut to do it. And I said, okay, the way that Rose City hired me was, I was talking with, the board, and was like, well, I started doing sponsorship right off the bat. Because, I was like, okay, well, I can totally sell this. Like, and I worked at an ad agency, so I already had that kind of in my blood. And I mean, PBR gave us like a check for $3,000, and we actually used that as the down payment. Like, I literally had to put that in the bank and then turn around and give it for a down payment on a venue, for our first event. But like, very early on, we were like, okay, well, sponsorships are a good way to do this, but it's really quite a nickel and dime business for a lot of people. It was very much supported by mom and pop shops. And I said, okay, well, if I make $30,000 in sponsorship, basically you're getting a free employee. So we started having those conversations about like, money in and money out. Like, it shouldn't be about, it's really about creating an overall balanced budget of how do you get all the things that you need done with a budget. How do you go, okay, here's the amount coming in from membership dues. Here are all my kind of overhead operating expenses, all that kind of jazz that are kind of finite, and then you go, okay, well, how do we afford, a staff member or two staff members? I would say I'm an executive director and a volunteer coordinator, do them both half time to start with. And then, throw in a bookkeeper who works 2 hours a week, boom, you're done. To start with. But like, looking at those things and going, okay, well, what are the things we need to grow? Because then you go, okay, well, how is my, if I'm not looking at like, who's the coolest person in my league that everybody fucking loves. I'm going, what are the two things that we need? One, we need a person who's going to safeguard all of our like contracts and making sure that if we're getting money coming in from grants, sponsorship, tickets, whatever, that we're delivering on what that money is supposed to give, on the back end to people. The other thing is your volunteers. You need a crap ton of volunteers to run Derby organizations, and you need somebody who's good at going out and finding volunteers that can help with higher level stuff and teach you things and bring you resources. So then you've got your population of helpers, and you've got your person who's really kind of providing that like stable driving force behind the business. So you just kind of like, you have to look at how you start investing, and like a lot of it is like, where do you invest money that's going to be making money, that's going to be bringing you returns? And then it kind of just grows from there. And
I think the word investment is probably going to be the the key that unlocks a lot of the conversations about money. Because from the conversations I've had with people about money and revenue, I think the aversion to discussing it comes from this kind of idea that like, oh, we're not doing it for the money. Like Derby is a pure sport. And it's like, okay, cool. Everybody thinks that until you're practicing outside in the Texas heat, or you want to go on a trip with your team and you can't afford it and you're asking the league if they can help, or you're saying like, oh, the league should do more work on inclusivity and equity. And it's like, well, we don't have any resources with which to provide equity. And now all of a sudden,
does that BIPOC person who's going to invest their time in teaching you about inclusivity and reading all your policies deserve to get paid for it? The one that I did,
exactly.
The one that I worked with last year sure did. And I mean, I spent a little over $12,000, and I think that was them giving us a crazy smart deal. Like, but yeah, that's the thing. You can't build a sport based on just people giving up all their time, because they inevitably get to a point where they are fairly resentful.
Yes.
And then you've got all of your damn rocks in that, like, you know, what is it? All your eggs are in one basket, right? You have this person who's been volunteering for you, and if they don't feel the proper level of appreciation, that they could take their, you know, they could just leave.
Right.
You know, and it's like, and so many leagues have been like, oh, well, we had good years because we had like these really great board members, or this person at the helm of marketing, or a really great person at the head of training, whatever the things are, right? And then they've had like down years where, oh, well, we had the person who did sponsorship left, so we couldn't do anything. And it's like, that's not how you build a sport.
I've heard those stories.
Yeah, you need a base level of stability. Like, when you look at all the other sports around, they weren't all volunteer. They, you know, they believed in building infrastructure. They believed in, like, you know, same thing. Like, think about it this way: in the early days of broadcasting games, so there was like Derby News Network would broadcast games, and then we were like, and then Rose City brought Blaze Streaming Media down to Sacramento to regionals, I believe it was. And it was like, okay, well, let's standardize the way we broadcast games, right? Because the thing is, if you want to teach people a sport, you got to have the same angles on the track. And it's one of those weird things that people don't think about, but it's one of those standardizing things about a sport. And it's totally it's a strange correlation to running a sports organization, but it's true. You have to standardize the way you do things and have some stability around it in order for it to grow and expand, succeed.
Agreed. I think I'm gonna start using that word investment.
I don't know if I would. I think that might be a word that I wouldn't use the word investment in terms of dollars. I would use investment in terms of resources, people resources, time resources, and I would talk about your resources as an overall pie that is like you as a human being and the amount of hours that you have to dedicate to roller derby, right? And then looking at that and going, okay, and then, you know, and all of your other folks, if you have folks that are like, oh no, he let the dogs out again. my dog is
that's helpful.
My dog's walking right there and he's like, I'm gonna bark at something. Don't know what it is. Yeah, so I think that, like, talking about how in a league, getting people to think about trade-offs, I think is important, because I don't think that that's a big thing that people think about, but it's like, if we need to do this thing over here, it's going to detract from this thing over here. So you really have to be looking at, where's the trade-off? What is the thing that's going to move us along?
Yeah.
So.
Agreed. So it sounds like Rose City was like very fortunate in those early years that y'all had so many people. So you had to learn those lessons early. But let's pivot and talk about on-track success, because, you know, you had 200 skaters. So it led to like some awesome organizational innovation. But what was the point at which Rose City started to become quote unquote good? Because it's like you had 200 skaters, but it sounds like when it comes to interleague competition, y'all weren't that successful. So what happened to where y'all started seeing the success? Was it a change in training, or was it like, oh, all of a sudden we got these great skaters and then, you know, we just went from there?
Well, I think that there's some of it is the maturity of the sport, right? Mm-hmm. So as the sport starts maturing, we had, and like, I'm not going to give you like specific dates because then people are just going to yell at me and be like, oh, you forgot this thing. I got interviewed one time and somebody was like, do you remember what happened in so-and-so year? And I was like, no, not at all. And it was super funny because none of us that were on this call could remember anything. And the announcer was interviewing us and he's like, how come you guys know nothing? I'm like, dude, information in, information out. Like, anyways, so there's a few things I think at play. One, as our organization started maturing, we had skaters who had been around longer and were getting more exposure to playing other people, right? So that's kind of the key is like, you have to play people that are better than you to get good, right? To know what good looks like. Because if you're the very best in your league and you're just playing with your league mates, that's why I'm like, go to RollerCon, people. Like, go play people you've never played before. And if you're in a small league and you only get to play against the same, 9, 10 people, because they're the people that are at your level, right? And you're all playing against each other. Like, say there's like 15 of you. You're all playing against each other on a regular basis. Get out there and go play people you've never played with, because you will get better on the track by listening to people who are on the track and letting them know that you're open to feedback. And I think that's the thing is we started going and playing other places. And I think that there's a certain level of people taking it seriously. So when they're taking it seriously, we're adding in extra types of trainings. And I think about, adding in off skates, adding in conditioning skating and things like that, adding in outdoor skating, and then really finding folks who were really driven and love strategy. One of our coaches, Rob Lobster, he was in the early days of Voodoo Donuts, and he was ended up their CEO. He actually passed 2 weeks before we got our first world champion title.
I remember that.
Yeah, it was, oh God, that was a hard weekend. So I get teary-eyed whenever I think about it. But I remember him and Mullet, they really dove into strategy, and they dove into looking at other sports and what is the strategy going on in Derby, and what are the lessons that we can pick up from other sports. So I think there was a culmination of skaters wanting to be better skaters, the culmination of our coaching staff wanting to be better and learning and talking to people. Then I think that we also started benefiting by people moving to Portland, because Portland was just a super fun place to live. And so I think that there was a kind of the culmination of those things. And really, as a league, we made active decisions that encouraged our trajectory, right? So I started setting aside $10,000 a year towards my travel team traveling. That made it more accessible for a lot of people. We started having certain fundraisers that were just for travel team type things. We made decisions about transferring in that made it easier for people to transfer into our organization. We also, I think when you look at things if you look at how your arc from the very beginning of your organization all the way up to your all-star team functions. So we started a youth league in 2009 for teenagers, right? So there's a feeder stream right there of people who will go from being teenagers to being adults. We also, and I laugh now because I'm thinking about the number of people on my all-star team who grew up in Rose City. So all of a sudden we have the average age of a skater dropped considerably, right? Because they were coming up through that. We also have a recreational program that's robust. And these are all in-house with us. So our recreational program, so we, at one point, I think we tapped out around 600 and something skaters. It's a lot. But so the recreational program typically floats right around 200 skaters in it, and people don't have requirements. And then at some point they might decide they want to go into adult competitive, and they, try out, or they go through the boot camp. And so part of it is structurally being able to build the sheer volume of people to grow good skaters. Other things is, so the volume of, the ability to have, I think we rock 50 hours a week of practice times at our peak. Right now it's less than that. But building in some of those things where you go, okay, how are all the ways that we end up having a really strong pool of skaters. So, we'll have on our travel team a mixture of people who have moved to Portland to play derby, but then also homegrown skaters that have come up through our youth program, and also looking at how in your organization are you encouraging people to turn around and look behind them and give people a whip, right? So do you have all-star level strategy, making it all the way down? So we have a 7 to 12-year-old program called the Pedals, and then we have our teenage program, the Buds, and then we have our Wreckers recreational program, and then our adult home teams, 4 of those, and then our travel team. All the way down to the Pedals level, how do we incorporate kind of how do we make that strategic decisions at that level where that's still about like fun and it's modified contact and it's about kids having a great time and learning how to be teammates and having coaches that are really all supporting the whole athlete, right? So how do you move and make sure that the strategy from the very tippy top of roller derby is making its way down into youth derby, right? So it's a lot of it's a lot of trying to get like all the parts to work together. But I mean, it's rough. I will not pretend like running a roller derby league is easy, and like we don't have all the bumps that everybody has. Is
there more leagues in Portland now besides y'all?
No, there's
y'all, right?
Yeah, there's a league in Vancouver, which is at the bottom of Washington.
Mm-hmm.
And which totally makes sense because like just getting back and forth over the river is difficult, and they're a smaller program, so there are folks who are going to be like on their team and traveling and doing their thing. So you could be, it's kind of big fish in a smaller pond as opposed to a smaller fish in a big pond. And there's also people that just choose to go. There was also a league out in Hillsborough which doesn't have. They're on the west side though, so it's like. If you live over there, like you do not want to try to get to our facility for an evening practice. Like, so a lot of it is about like who has a practice on what day that I can go to is kind of a deciding factor. I would never pretend like I didn't want somebody to skate in my league and one of those other leagues because I totally see it as like, you want to play derby, play some derby, and that should fit your life however it fits in. Like my dues are this, so you make your decisions, or if you need a scholarship, those are there. But like, I think largely it has to do with like all of us want. I mean, I think currently, actually, this is funny because I am the big boss, right? So I have other people do things. I'll just say that before I say this. I'm pretty sure that one of those leagues currently practices in our facility on Sunday nights. I'm not quite sure.
Not sure, but
I'm not quite sure which one. But I think that like at the end of the day. I didn't want it to be like, it shouldn't be like an animosity thing. We're all about derby being awesome. Like they come and play games in the house. Like we're just very different beasts, right? Like you want to be a part of a league that is like 40, 50 people deep and y'all do everything together. I remember the days of doing everything together. You know what I mean? Like I would throw house parties at my house. Like the first house I bought was the same month that I started Rose City Rollers. It was my first home that I owned. And I would throw parties there, and the entire league could come. You know what I mean? And so some people really want that. Like the entire league does everything together and wants that. So I don't think that all leagues have to grow to be our size. I think that satellite leagues around big leagues is great because it addresses the people that live in those areas. Are some of your very best skaters going to move like closer to town and end up coming and trying to play for my all-star teams or my home teams because they want the glory? Maybe, but that's a personal decision. I mean, the same way that we're like, we want to have all the levels of derby for everyone. And we want to make sure everybody's having a good time playing.
Right. I was just curious because it's such a big league, like here, because Austin is smaller than Portland, I believe. And there's like, 5, 6, 7 leagues here.
I stopped counting that.
So it's just, I was just wondering, like, if there was more, like, if they're actually surviving having y'all there. It was such a big league.
I just rule with an iron fist. So, no, I think that like I just think about in the early days, like if something is going wrong in an organization and leadership is not willing to hear people. then that's, I think, one of the biggest things. If things are so bad that like that people really think that starting, well, hey, you're not showing the shitty side of roller derby if people think it's a great idea to go start their own league. It's a lot of work.
I'm gonna sip on that too.
Yeah, I think that like one of the things that we've done the entire way along, and holy shit, COVID was like horrible. People were horrible. But one of the things we started very early on was surveying our membership and asking questions all the way along, because like you can't really do direct democracy in roller derby. We tried that in the early days of WFTDA, and that was a shit show too. But surveying people and getting people's feedback, like especially during COVID, it was like it was so important to ask people how they felt about things. Like, are you comfortable skating? When do you think you'll be comfortable skating? We're gonna do pod skating practice, which is what we called it, and we shared all this information with WFTDA, where we had like 6 people spread out around our 11,000 square foot facility, and 1 person would skate at a time. And we worked with our county officials to do this safely. We're like, before that, we were letting people just use our facility by themselves, and I paid for 1 million parents to get CPR certified. But again, it's like, okay, here's individual skating that you could do. There's pod skating, and then we're gonna move into stable groups where you're all on the track together. And then we're gonna move into larger groups, and then we're gonna move into large format sign up. Everything that we did, we had surveys going the entire time with our membership, right? So we were getting a real temperature check. And sometimes, and now then people would send us fucking horrible things. Oh my God, you're trying to murder us. And like, we had some pretty big blow-ups. I will tell you, like, I lost my shit when like members were like screaming online about how we're trying to kill people. And it's really hard to do your job when people are like, I hate you, but also do this thing for me.
Yeah.
And so it was really difficult, but I will tell you, the people who are in the league right now, I don't think they would tell you that they didn't feel like they had a voice in the way things were moving along. Some people might not like the decisions that we made, right? But we were gathering information the entire way. And so we knew, okay, well, we need to have this many pod practices. And it looks like, people are starting to get tired of this one thing now that things are opening up and we can do this other thing. And then, okay, well, that thing's losing favor. And so this next thing that's growing, okay, how do we, and then like diving into the logistics. Okay, well, we asked people about how they felt about vaccines, and everybody was like vaccinated and wanted to be vaccinated and wanted everybody on the track to be vaccinated, right? And said we'd rather do that than have to play in masks forever. And so people were making these decisions, right, as an organization. Some of them I was surprised by, other ones I wasn't surprised by. It was interesting for us to be able to have that constant like feedback cycle. Mm-hmm. But I think that's part of running a league, is that people have to feel not only like if they're feeling like they're held at bay because of transparency, right? Like, I know that my IT system is really like probably making people feel a lack of trust right now, because it's just people are having a hard time getting the information they need and having the conversations they want. But it's the same thing with decision making along the way. You have to find a mechanism for people to at least know they're being heard.
Right.
And then you have to figure out how to write surveys where people can't just like lay all their bullshit on you. And sometimes you have to like, not read those surveys if you're hungry or tired or a human, because sometimes people are just really shitty in the comment section, and we all know that.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
But I think that that's part of it, is that people in Portland didn't necessarily want the task of starting up another league. They wanted kind of what our league had to offer, as far as we made the programs. Like I think about the kid program, right? One of my skaters was like, she wasn't even a skater. She was doing an AmeriCorps project, and she was like, can I start a youth component of the derby? And I was like, yeah, we talked about it and like built it all out. She built it out as a project, right? But it's one of those kind of things that people are like, there's this need that's missing, right?
Right.
How do we do that? I had parents that wanted to, they wanted 7 to 12-year-olds. And I remember it very specifically because that year I was helping Gorge roller girls. I think that was Gorge roller derby now, but get set up, right? So we had a deal in the first year where Gorge was basically an arm of the Rose City Rollers, even though they were an hour and a half away in the Gorge. But I brought them in. I was like, showed them all my systems. I worked with them every week on like how to run their stuff, how to do marketing. Like my whole staff went out there, helped them run their first bouts. We trained them, right? And I got a portion of their proceeds in the first like couple of years. And then we like peacefully dissolved it. But when I was doing that is when the 7 to 12-year-olds were like, parents were like, we need a 7 to 12-year-old derby. I'm like, okay, I hear you. Let's find you room in our facility. And then you guys can do your own thing. You will be your own entity for right now because I have to finish my commitment over here with the Gorge, and then we'll come back around. As soon as we were done with the Gorge, we folded the kids into our organization and kind of, made it all steps. But again, I didn't say, no 7 to 12-year-olds. I said, can't do this right now. I need you guys to get this off the ground and build it with the knowledge that it will be folded into RCR. And so, you have to look at those things, or what are the things that people are saying they need, want, matter to them, right? And sometimes you have to point out, okay, your needs and wants have to take into consideration a balance of resources, right?
Yeah, that makes sense.
That does make sense. So considering everything that you've seen from Derby as you've been with it from the very beginning and gone through this the pandemic and the associated hiatus. I have two questions. First one is, do you think international derby will get back to what it once was?
Well, I think it once was fairly disjointed. So I don't know that we had ever landed on the right solution. So yes, because I believe that people love derby, and those of us that want to play nationally and internationally are like, we're down to be a part of the conversation and we want to see this happen. But hey, maybe your quest for equity didn't need to mean that rankings no longer happen.
Wow, Rocket Mean is amazing, right? This one's about to get really good. And if you're enjoying this interview as much as we hope you are, please do us a solid. Take a second and share this episode with at least one person who you think would enjoy it. We're going to go ahead and pause it right here because we have like a whole nother hour to go, but make sure you subscribe so that you get notified whenever part 2 drops. In the meantime, we'll catch you on our next episode. I'm Bitch 2 and I'm out.